Thank you all for being here. I want to thank our panelists as well. We focus a lot on work throughout this event, and there's a reason for that. Work means a lot. For somebody who's struggling, a job can mean the difference between poverty and getting by or doing better. Employment is such an effective measure of someone doing well that if you're involved at all in criminal justice reform issues, you know that there are stats about what a job means to reducing recidivism. I know Rodney mentioned that earlier. If someone can come out of prison and get a job and have it for 6 months or more, the rates of recidivism plummet. I mean, it's well known that that's a fact. Yet in Georgia, despite the very good unemployment rate that we have, we still have an issue with unemployment. Hidden in the numbers is in the neighborhood of 200,000 to 300,000 people who have basically dropped out of the labor force. Now, you don't hear that. These are people who are experiencing things like a criminal record, can't get a job, long-term homelessness, so their appearance, manners, and all the rest of it won't allow them to interview well for a job or have stability to do that. Some are on their way back to prison, dealing with addictions, mental health issues. These are all situations that, for most of us, unless we've had a chance to meet folks like our panelists here, would think are insurmountable. But what I'm here to tell you is that they are not insurmountable. There is hope for even the folks that I just described, the folks who are largely forgotten. And everybody on this panel is doing something about it in a very unique way. So I'm excited to be here and be able to talk to all you guys. So thank you for being here with us. Let me just do a brief introduction, and the questions will ferret out what these folks do and who they are. But to my left, Stacey Howell is Executive Director of Every Woman Works. She's been with the organization, a little over 18 months? Okay. Now, Stacey and I have just met today, but I've known about her organization for many years and the work that they do with single women and seeking employment, and they do tremendous work. Beside her is Lloyd Martin. He is, Vice President of Manufacturing and IT with CKS Packaging, a rather large company here in Georgia that's doing something very unique on the employment front, and I think you'll be interested in hearing about that. Next to Lloyd, we have Dave Durocher, and he has traveled from Salt Lake City to be with us today. Dave is with an organization called the Other Side Academy, and they are doing tremendous work with folks who, but for his program, would be back in prison. And I can't wait for you to hear about what they're doing. I've had the chance to travel out to their facilities and see what they do. It's impressive, to say the least. And last but not least, we have, Philip Hunter. Sorry, my nerves are getting the best of me right now, so I'll just own that. Philip is Executive Director with Georgia Works and is doing tremendous work with homeless men in the city of Atlanta. And I'll tell you, having been to their facilities, talked to Phil and Bill McGann, the founder of the organization, they are working with folks who are struggling with things that we can only imagine. But yet they are finding work for these folks and helping them get there. So with that, I just want to start with a question. Stacey, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit, if you will, about how you came to Every Woman Works, just a little bit about your history and about the organization.
You're going to have to pull a plug if I go too long.
No, that's okay.
Just to start a little bit, my background's a little bit different than some of the stories you've heard here because I grew up in a middle-class household, and my mom was a factory worker who started on the peace line and moved up to quality control supervisor, which was a big deal in our family when she made it to the office. But my dad worked in corporate America, did not pass the bar after going to law school when he was young, and then later went back. So I had a middle-class backing financially, but I had the real detailed life of a factory worker. So that kind of made me who I was, and I went on to know the difference of the economic divide personally, growing up in a working class neighborhood, but then with the backing of going to a real good school, public school, and then going on to Cornell University. So with that, I always knew that, or asked the question, why do I have more than my friends? What am I supposed to do? I'm favored for a reason. And I lived my life knowing that I was determined to give back. So with that, I went on and I worked in corporate America. I'm nervous. But as a trailblazer for women, because I came in the 80s and 90s and diversity was the big term. And I looked around, and my role, I managed to get on the board and be a voice to why doesn't our corporation at the head look like the communities we serve? For corporations like, I grew up in HP, Hewlett-Packard, Eli Lilly, Johnson & Johnson. I worked for Fortune 50 companies. But when we looked at the top, it didn't look like the communities we served. There were no women at the top. Excuse me, not to insult, but they were all gray-haired white men. They didn't look like me, they didn't look like my gender. And so I grew up in companies where it was changing. And there were women before me who wanted to make a difference. So they took me in to help be a trailblazer. And we fought for women to be managers. So as you know, HP, one of the forming companies of a female CEO, even before Carly, our division had a female CEO in the healthcare position. So I then went on to be on boards of education and to make sure that kids had exposure. And so as Anthony was talking on the board earlier in education, what was the difference? And it was the education and the exposure that either you got at home or you got through mentorship. And I began to covet that, and then went on and I married a school teacher, and education became a big thing in our lives. I ran for political office, and that was my platform. All of that to say that everything I did kind of prepared me for Every Woman Works, which is an organization that was not founded by me. It's now 14 years old. The founder, Tilly O'Neill-Kiles, created the organization as a single mother who went through her own barriers and then decided in her retirement with AT&T that she wanted to form a legacy. And she took this organization for 14 years, and then I stepped in 18 years ago to send her child to high school, college, and graduate school, and incorporating my background of IT and leading-edge technology to create leading-edge classrooms and the training that I kind of received. I started out in inside sales and went into sales out in the field and became the top sales rep. And why can't I do that for women? Corporations like HP that went to India and taught people how to speak English so that they could do our call service. Why can't we do that here? Why can't I train women to speak on the telephone, because that's where I started, and they can start here in Atlanta where inside sales is the niche of a lot of these software companies. So that's where Every Woman Works and I became married, and now I partner with organizations like this, corporations, to help make a difference in the lives of women who are single, women who have gone through trauma, domestic violence, sex trafficked, because Atlanta ranks 1 to 3 in sex and human trafficking. How do I get those women back on a course of success with the help of all those around me in partnerships, and encourage corporations to give people a second chance?
That's great. Thank you. Phil, I'm going to jump to you after butchering your name. Sorry about that. So I've known you for a while. So I love your work, and I'm constantly impressed with you as a person, your commitment to what you do, and just the reach that Georgia Work has had over a relatively short period of time. I mean, it's incredible. I want to know a little bit about you. Like, what drove you to get into this work, and tell us about Georgia Works and the success that you're having.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Phil Hunter, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Georgia Works. And I was raised here in Atlanta. I wasn't born here. I was born in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I was an Army brat. My dad was in the 101st Airborne. And we moved to Atlanta when he was going to Vietnam, and he didn't return home from Vietnam. So my mom decided to raise us here. She sent My brother and sister and I to college. My brother and I went to Morehouse, and my sister to Spelman as a single mom. And I grew up and had quite a career beginning. Got married, had a small child. And in 1988, which is what has prepared me for the work I'm doing, I was out with some friends one night, and I got introduced to cocaine. For the next 15 years, my life spiraled in and out of control. And I remember one night, I was sleeping in my car because I had gotten divorced, and my teenage daughter called me, says, "Daddy, where are you? I'm worried about you." And at that moment, I realized I still had somebody that cared about me. Ended up getting in trouble, got arrested from stealing from an employer. And in lieu, I had never been in any trouble, was always an honor student and everything. In lieu of jail, was offered long-term treatment, which I did. And eventually ended up still homeless when I left there, working at the task force for the homeless as a bus driver. And that began my work in homelessness. And after leaving there, folks at United Way saw the work that I had done, and I guess they heard about some of the work that I'd done. I got hired on at United Way as a project manager, and very quickly was promoted to director of homelessness at United Way. About 5 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Bill McGann approached me about helping him get an organization started that will help homeless men, returning citizens, those that had been chronically homeless on the streets for many years, see if we could get them the help and get them back to work. And I accepted that challenge. We just completed 5 years this past September. We are, at this point, have graduated 583 men back to self-sufficiency, with 80% of those men still employed and housed. Thank you. The greatest, I think, the most important piece of this for me is that we always believe that folks' lives are redeemable, that they can be restored, and given the right mentorship, the right leadership, the right guidance, that they can be restored. And mine was restored. And so I think I made a promise to God many years ago that if I got my life back, I'm married again now, I got kids, my kids are all grown now, but my life was completely restored. Everything that I lost, gotten back, and not so much material, but my life got me back. And so I've been now working with homeless men for a number of years, and probably the greatest joy that I see is seeing these men restored back to the lives of their kids, seeing these men restored back to their wives and things. And so it's been an incredible journey, and we're hoping that we can take this model that we've created and replicate it in other areas in metro Atlanta, but also Georgia and the Southeast.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that, Phil. I had never heard the personal part of that, so thank you for being willing to share that.
What drives the passion.
Yeah, awesome, excellent. All right, Dave, you're up next. So, similar question. I want to know about you and your background and what brought you to the Other Side Academy. But I will say this: the reason why I asked you to be part of this, or wanted you to at least, is I see something unique in what you guys are doing. You are intervening at the point where people are going off to prison for a very long time if they don't make a change, which is a point at which you have a lot of leverage, but where people are very vulnerable and you don't know what they're going to do, right? So I want to hear from you. Tell us about your background and what's going on at the Other Side Academy.
Thank you, Eric, very much for the invite and having me here. It is an honor to be here. So my name is Dave Durocher. I'm the managing director at the Other Side Academy, but I haven't always been the managing director at the Other Side Academy. My odyssey began a long time ago when I was about 12 years old. I was the kind of kid that would steal alcohol out of my dad's bottle, and I would drink it, and eventually he'd come home from work and have a drink and realize that it wasn't working anymore. It was working for me, but not for him. So, of course, I started getting in trouble, and it was not long after that, around 13, I started smoking pot. So I was drinking, smoking pot, and then in my freshman year of high school, I started doing cocaine. I was the kind of kid that stole everything that wasn't bolted down and some that was. I manipulated neighbors, family, you name it. I stole it or manipulated people out of money so that I could continue to support the coke habit that I was practicing. So I did coke all the way through high school. I was the kind of kid that would go to class with a vial of coke in my pocket. I would sit in the back of the classroom. The teacher would be at the front board. I'd take the vial out. I'd pour it between the pages of my book, whether it be history, math, science, or whatever it was. I'd pull the big pen apart, and when she wasn't looking, I'd lean down and snort coke in class. I did that for 4 years. How I managed to graduate high school is still a mystery to me. Not that it mattered, because I didn't do much with my life afterwards. But I did graduate, and then not only did I graduate from high school, but I graduated from coke to methamphetamine. And when I started doing meth, I thought it saved my life because it got me off cocaine, and cocaine was killing me. Imagine the rationale, huh? So started doing methamphetamine, and it didn't take long before the wheels started to fall off, and I started getting arrested. I did a 2-year prison term, got out for 59 days, did a 5-year prison term, got out for 60 days, so at least I was out longer. Did a 6-year prison term, got out for 4 months, then did a 10-year prison term, and again was out for 4 months. So it was 2, then 5, then 6, then 10. And as you could imagine, after that 10-year prison sentence, I got arrested again. This time I was looking at the rest of my life in prison. After the high-speed chase in Huntington Beach, and after waking up in jail and going to court the first time, I was looking at 29 years. I was tired, I was broken, I was scared. And I just, I sat in my cell and thought to myself, I've lived my adult life in and out of prison, now I'm gonna die there. So I wrote Delancey Street. Some of you may be familiar with Delancey Street. I wrote them a letter. They came and they interviewed me, and they accepted me. And the judge told me in no uncertain terms he would never send me to Delancey Street. I wasn't Delancey Street material. So of course I go back to my cell, I'm dejected. I'm scared that I'm probably not gonna get this opportunity. And I fought my case for many, many months pre-sentence, and then one day I wrote Judge Pacheco a letter. It was 4 pages long, front and back. And never once did I tell him he was wrong in his assessment of me, because he wasn't. And I told him my life story from my earliest memory to the day that I wrote that letter. And I'll never forget the next time I went to court. I sat in that cage in shackles, ankle irons, waist irons, handcuffs, and that judge said, Mr. Durocher, I'm gonna give you the chance of a lifetime. I'm gonna send you to Delancey Street, but you're gonna plead guilty to all of your charges. And when you get kicked out or you split, I've got you for the rest of your life. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt vertigo. When you get good news or bad news, you kind of feel dizzy. 10 seconds ago, I was looking at the rest of my life in prison, and the judge just said he's gonna give me the opportunity to go to Delancey Street. So I got out that next morning. I went to Delancey Street. It's a 2-year re-education facility, and I ended up staying 8.5 years. The last 5 of which I managed the Los Angeles facility, 250 residents at any given time, and 15 vocational training schools that generate our revenue. So that's kind of what brought me to the Other Side Academy. A little over 3 years ago, Joseph Grenny and Tim Stay reached out to me in California and said, we want to start a replication of Delancey Street in Utah. Are you interested? I said, you've got to be crazy. Seriously, you have to be to want to do this. So they flew out to Los Angeles, we met, we had our interview, if you will. I came out to Salt Lake City not long after that. We found a property, and this was roughly, 3+ years ago. We now have over 90 students that would otherwise be on the streets, in jails, or in prison. Our average student has been arrested over 25 times. This is the long-term drug addict and criminal combined. It's a really difficult population to help. But the Other Side Academy is very unique. It's free. It's residential. We take no money from the city, the county, the state, the federal government, no insurance money, and no rich mommy and daddy money. You folks aren't paying for the people to be at the Other Side Academy. They are doing it themselves. We operate our own vocational training schools or social enterprises that generate the revenue. So the minute the student or the inmate gets there, that day they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Nobody is trying to fix them. They are given the opportunity to learn to fix themselves. They've got skin in the game the minute they get there. So it's long term and it's hard, make no mistake about it. The other beautiful thing is not being tethered to the government ATM means they don't have to leave on day 30, day 60, day 90, or day 730, which is 2 years. We don't need the funding for the next bed space. You can stay as long as you need to until you've completely recalibrated your moral compass and became a decent human being. Then you graduate when you know in your belly that you're ready to reintegrate back into the community and become a productive member.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Awesome. Lloyd, you are sort of alone on the panel in a way. You're not running a nonprofit or an organization that's built around trying to help folks like this that we're talking about, but you're with a company that has a heart and has intentionally gone about trying to help people who maybe they're coming out of prison, maybe they're homeless, but you're giving them opportunities to work. Similar question. I want to know more about you, frankly, and what drove you to take this up as part of the company and as part of your personal mission, which I know it's become. But what does the program do, and why has it been so successful?
Okay, thank you. That's hard to follow, right? But like Stacy, they said I have 7 minutes to talk, and I'm like, 7 minutes? I'm so passionate about this, I could do this for 7 hours. You might have to pull the plug. But I think in order to understand what we're doing and how we got there at CKS Packaging, you need to understand a little bit about CKS Packaging. So if you don't mind, I'll give you a little brief history on this. So our CKS Packaging, we plan to be a $500 million company next year. We make plastic bottles and containers. I tell people that if you pick up a plastic container in your house, whether it be a milk bottle or a tea, Chick-fil-A was here, we make those tea bottles as well, those types of things, there's probably a 40% chance that we made it. We have 22 manufacturing facilities in the United States. We employ about 2,600 people, a little over that now, and we're still privately owned after the second go-around, I guess, but 22 years. So we're privately owned. We are by a family called, their last names are the Sewells. John Sewell, our CEO, is sitting right over here at this table. The Sewell family owns us, and they run, lead, and manage our company with the strong Christian values that they have. And that's what our culture is really all about at our company. And they instill it in us and as leaders, and we go and instill it throughout the whole, every one of our facilities. So that's a little bit about us. And what does it mean to be a Christian valued company and culture? Well, let me tell you, we have 22 manufacturing facilities, like I said, and every Saturday we shut down all 340 machines, and we start them all back up on Monday because we don't run on Sunday. We have that covenant with God that we don't do that. And so that's one. We have prayer before every meeting. Everybody's welcome to join us when our company went before our meetings. We have a war room, which we established so that we can take all of our concerns, our employees' concerns, our families' concerns, our friends, whatever it may be, our prayer partners, and we just throw them in our war room, and that's where we go, and we pray to God that He will give us the support, and we thank Him for the support that He has given us. We also tithe, the owners tithe, 20% of our earnings every year. So you can imagine a $500 million company, how much we tithe, and we tithe that to a little over 50 ministries throughout the United States. So having said that, I one day about 2.5 years ago, helping out with John on another place, another ministry called Maximum Impact that Drew Sewell actually manages and runs and established. We were handing out backpacks to children in need. I think we handed out about 3,200 backpacks that day off the back of a trailer. And it struck me that, we really ought to be doing something to help people get employed. Maybe we ought to be doing something else besides this. And that stuck with me for a little while, and I prayed on it. I went to our war room. I prayed on it more. And I eventually, long story short, I went to John Sewell, our CEO, and Scott Sewell, our COO, and I said, look, the Lord's just put it on me that we need to have a formal second chance program. We need to do something more. John says, well, go for it. I went to Scott Sewell and asked him about it. Said, the Lord's just put it on me that we need to have a second chance program. And Scott Sewell looks at me and goes, who am I to argue with the Lord? He says, so go for it. So I did. I had no idea what I was getting into or how this was going to work. So went to one of our ministries, which is actually the Safe House back here. They have a booth. was where I started, and them and an agency called Dismiss, that is a prison release program off of Fulton Industrial, down where our corporate headquarters is. And started there thinking 5, 10 people, if we could just help 5, 10 people, if we could just serve them, right? If we can get them on and they could have a sustained employment and sustained life, that would be fantastic. 5 or 10, that's what we needed to do. But the shock that I had in the first 3 months and the frustration I had at all the obstacles in our way to bring somebody from either reentry out of being incarcerated or from the homeless at Safe House to a sustained employed situation with, and I think Tony Kitchen's left, but as we've talked several times, with not just reentry, but reintegration. That's 2 different things, 2 totally different things. Reintegration is huge. And the obstacles from transportation to establishing identity, to establishing their self-esteem again, to getting bank cards, bank accounts, getting them a car, a place to live. There's so many obstacles, and there's so many, there's a lot of people and a lot of organizations that want to help, I found, but there's very few continuity in all those organizations that actually works. And it's in those obstacles. So I said, but I'm not discouraged. Because I'm not going to talk about me, really, because as everybody else did, and I appreciate the great journeys by all of you. What drives, God drives my passion, and God drives my passion. And so that it's really all about Him, and it's really about our organization and our company. And I started, as I said, I started out with the 4 or 5 and all these obstacles, but I wasn't discouraged. We kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. It's been about 2.5 years now. We have a lot of success stories I could talk about. We have managers, we have supervisors, and we still have some other employees that came out of our Second Chance program that were either incarcerated or in rehab for a 2-year program, 18-year program with Synacor in Dallas. We work with 9 organizations, and I'm looking for more. That's really what I'm up here. I'm trying to get more and more help. And today, after a little over 2 years, as of last week, we have 139 sustained Second Chance employees working in our facilities across the United States.
Excellent, excellent. Stacey, next one's for you. If we can, I really want to hear more about the profile of the women that you're helping and exactly what you guys do at Every Woman Works.
Thank you. Let me just say, too, I did not say, I was a little nervous, so I've kind of warmed up. It's amazing to be here with all of you, and thank you for sharing your stories, because it's personal and you don't have to, but it always makes a difference. So thank you, and thank you, Eric, for finding me. So Every Woman Works, when it was started, it was a woman that was 100% probably in poverty and a single household. Today, that woman's changed. We see the gamut. We see women, we service our veterans, our female veterans, but a lot of them have some kind of trauma that may have started at a young age in their household, in their family. I think a very high percentage of our women were molested by family members and people they trusted. And so what happens is barriers, things that happen, we kind of bury it in the pit of our stomach and we don't deal with it. And so what happens is there's triggers and there's this displacement and there's this lost feeling and never being able to get beyond that, and it becomes a barrier. Whether it's a barrier, you have a temper, whether you're very promiscuous, whether these behaviors that come out because we're hurting. And then it's self-medicating, whether it's addiction. And so all of these things follow something that may have occurred in our lives. And then we look at a woman who we worked, and we were the work development partner for over a year at the City of Refuge, and we dealt with the women that were human trafficked and sex trafficked, and we helped to get them back on their feet. And then we have a woman who's highly educated, a woman like myself that was laid off and then had to reinvent and didn't know how to for a while, and we're lost. And if you're divorced and a single mom and you're head of household and you don't have a job and you can't pay the rent and you're losing your home, now depression is setting in. If you're dealing with constant homelessness and it's chronic and there's behaviors and you get lost and there's something that drove you there, or you can't get on your feet and you don't have a support system. Maybe mom was addicted to crack and cocaine, so you don't have someone you can call and say, help me. And so therefore you wander and you're lost again. So we help those women, and women come through us through churches. We too are a foundation of Christian principles. We open up to everyone because every religion is about love, patience, forgiveness, and the same foundation. So we use those principles to empower and to get forgiveness, to leave behind the past, to go forward and give you a second chance. And what we really do is work on our women to find that identity again, to find that self-worth, that unique talent that they have. We follow Steve Covey's 7 Habits of an Effective Person or Leader, and then the 8th habit, which is finding that passion, that experience, and those skills that are unique to you, that are really going to be your journey to success. And we help them find that. And we help them find it through a 5-week course curriculum where we deal with career, computer skills, relationship skills, conflict resolution, how to avoid a jerk or jerkette, because sometimes we keep repeating that and we have to identify that. And then how to handle ourselves in the work environment, problem solving. We have created a leading edge 21st century classroom with smart boards. We're now initiating tables in the back of our classroom for team building and conflict and problem solving, because when they leave us and graduate, we want them to have leadership skills. We want them to be identified as the team leader, a person who can solve problems. And you know what? They are an overcomer. They've already solved the biggest problem. And when they leave us, they go through interview skills, and we have corporations who adopt our classes, and they come in and they become coaches and mentors, and they hold their hand throughout. We have serviced over 2,000 women and over 5,000 children. And I'm able to say children because when we change the life of the mother, we change the life of her children. And so therefore, when we educate and get mom on board, she now changes the direction of her children. So you give a fishing pole to someone to fish, they might go and feed their family for a night. When you give a fishing pole to a mother, she's going to teach her children, we're going to teach their children, and the legacy goes on. And that's our philosophy. So we do what we can to let them honor themselves, their talents, their uniqueness. Let God be a part of it to know that they can forgive themselves, they can forgive those who've trespassed against them, they can move forward, that there's light ahead, and they're all diamonds. And each time we hone a facet of that diamond, the light comes in and you get to see all the colors.
Fantastic. Thank you. Phil, to you. You know, you're working with homeless men, so obviously you have a residential program. Can you give us a sort of a day in the life of somebody in your program, and what is it all about?
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much. So Georgia Works, men that come into our program, and we started, as I mentioned, 5 years ago, small program, 38 beds, I had 4 employees, and really kind of developed what we do over a period of time as we saw what the needs were and what the problems that men came with. Most of the men that come in our program have been homeless for a number of years. 75% of them have been to prison and probably have 3 felonies. We have a couple of guys that have been through our program that have now graduated and doing well that actually have been arrested over 100 times. And I can't even imagine someone being arrested that many times. But one of the things that we see a lot of young men with no education or a lack of education, been on the streets for a number of years, did not have good role models, hung out on the streets, got addicted to drugs, to jail and prison a lot. And for a lot of these, they came in angry a lot of times because of abuse, lots of trauma, and things I couldn't even imagine. And so what we did was took that program and really designed and put the staff and the pieces in place to be able to address those issues, because what I thought early on, I can get you a job and probably get you an apartment, but if I don't deal with you and the internal things, and deal with your spirituality, we've been talking a lot about that, then you won't keep that job very long. And you'll be back out on the streets and doing the things that you were doing. So we started dealing with those things very early. We've developed a pretty robust curriculum. So men in our program get up at 5:30 every morning. And that's how we initially started. Now we've grown much bigger, and so we run an in-house staffing business. So we have folks that work all three shifts. But they get up very early in the morning. A guy just coming in very early in the morning, get breakfast, and immediately there's classroom time. And it may be classes on addiction. It could be classes on men making better decisions. We try to develop what we call the Georgia Works Man. So we actually take men and take them through a series of values that we believe that if they incorporate in their life will become whole again. After that, they're doing chores. Some of them are going off to work. Before we send anyone out to work on a job, we take them through a period of what we call our street team. And so we dress them out in our Georgia Works blue. Make sure they're well-groomed because they're out, the public is seeing them, and we want to change the perception of what homelessness is. So they go out and actually clean communities, and then they come back in and there's more classroom time for other things. There's classes also in the evening, and then we have lights out. What we're trying to do with guys is I think you termed it very well, recalibrate. And we're trying to recondition and get them back used to being productive citizens. And so that's pretty much a life. They're covered up for most of the day, either work or classroom time. They spend a lot of time we have, so we're running a social enterprise, so they spend lots of time with case managers, and we develop from the issues and the barriers and the problems that they bring in, develop a treatment plan for each individual so that when they leave Georgia Works, they have addressed every issue that they have. And they might not all be solved, but they've been addressed and they're on a journey to actually solving those things. Many men come in, they're on probation. A lot of them have had child support issues and they're in arrears and owing thousands and thousands of dollars. Just all sorts of problems. No bank account, just things, no driver's license. All those things are addressed while you were there. And we actually make you do things. A lot of times, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of men come in and they have a spirit of rebelliousness, and probably a lot of that is what got them where they are. You know, your mom says, don't go do this, or I'm just going to go do it anyway. But so we really work on that person from the inside out. And if they really focus and they work hard, all those things can be overcome. So by the time a man leaves there, he's addressed his child support so that when an employer, if he goes to an employer, it's at a manageable level. Because a lot of times, and this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, if we don't address those things, that man leaves and he can't live. And then he becomes hopeless or helpless again, and he's back out on the street. So we really work on addressing all of the things that a person would encounter, or actually a person, so that they would be whole when they leave. One thing that we do provide, as I mentioned, a lot of men have a lot of past trauma. So we have licensed counselors on staff to be able to help them deal with that. It's really funny, a lot of times men are told to suck it up, you're strong, you can handle it, and you really can't. And what we do is very early on build trust so that they'll start talking about those things. It's not anything to be ashamed of, and we make it a very safe environment to be able to talk. And at that point there, you can start restoring a person's life. Just very slowly, day by day, you start restoring that life. And then that dignity restored, and then you start seeing the light come on. And then they can start addressing the things of the past and continue to move on. And so while we measure success by a job and housing, the real success is that man has regained his self-esteem, and regained himself.
Awesome. All right. Excellent. Thank you. All right, Dave. One of the things that was impressed upon me when I came out to see what you guys are doing at TOSA was the intake process, how the guys and women find your organization, and the process you take them through to make sure that they're going to be a right fit. And I'd just love to hear more about that and explain that to our audience here.
Are you sure they're ready for this?
Ready or not?
There's two ways people find the Other Side Academy. You can walk through the front door and take a seat on the bench. It is strategically placed there for a reason, because you're going to sit on that bench and wait for your interview, and it's literally the portal between your old life and your new one. The other way that people can come to us, and that's about 90% of our people, will write us a letter from jail, pre-sentence. We will go to the jails and interview them. If we accept them, they get a letter of acceptance that they can take to their LDA, prosecutor, and judge. And more times than not, if we interview them and accept them, the judge will send them to us. So those are the two ways that they come to us. But the way that we do the interview, I think, is unique and different than the way most people probably interview people. For example, can I share with them an example? Let's say I'm looking at somebody behind the glass and I'm interviewing them and they've been to jail 37 times and they've got kids. I'll ask them, do you have children? Yes, Dave, I've got kids. Do you love them? Yes, I love them very much. I'm sorry, John Doe. What did you say? I love my kids. You've been to jail 37 times. That's in their life, out of their life, in their life, out of their life. Do you mind telling me how you'd treat them if you hated them? I'm curious. When you think about it, they're not raising them, somebody else is. They kicked them on down the street like a drop kick for grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, somebody to raise them while they ran the streets, chased all the things that we do, and go in and out of jail and prison, but then they go to jail and all of a sudden they love their kids. And I ask them very simply, are you a sociopath or do you not know the definition of love? Because are you going to be judged on what you say or what you do? Because in your story, it says the complete opposite of what you're saying. And if they're not willing to listen to that, they can stay right there. Oftentimes, a tear runs down their cheek, their lip quivers, and they say, my goodness, I have never heard it put like that before. Or they tell me I'm crazy and they're Father of the Year. And I said, that's fine. Stay right where you're at. Stay right. Can I ask you one more question before I leave? Do your kids come visit you in jail? Well, yeah. You bring your kids to jail? Didn't you just say you love them? Then little Bobby goes back to school on Monday and he's really excited because he got to spend some time with Dad. Fast forward the tape 10 years. Where does he end up? Because he thinks it's cool. And then if you're going from jail to prison, guess where the kids are going? To prison. What did they do to get subjected to that? So you're not willing to go out, get a job, stop that lifestyle and raise them, but you're going to bring them to jail? Why? Because it makes you feel good. Guess why you're in trouble? For chasing the feel good. And your kids become the pawn. So that's just one part of the interview. It is a very robust interview, to say the least. Sometimes if you put your ear to the wall, you could probably hear it. But something else significant. When I did my 4 prison terms, after my 3rd prison term, the 6-year term, I wrote Delancey Street a letter. They came and they interviewed me and they didn't accept me. I had no idea why. I just got a letter that said no bed space. So I get out, I go back to prison for the 10-year prison sentence. As I mentioned earlier, I wrote Delancey Street a letter again. They come and they interviewed me, and this time they accepted me. I had no idea why they didn't accept me the first time, nor why they accepted me the second time, until 3 years later when I became an interviewer at Delancey Street. That's when I realized why they left me there. In that first interview, when the interviewer was talking to me, I never once asked him for help. All I talked about was the drugs, the guns, the women, the chaos, the mayhem, and who I wanted him to think I was. He left me right in jail where I belonged, and in not taking me, he helped save my life. I needed to go do that 4th prison term. In my 2nd interview, shackled, I'll never forget it. At the end of the interview, I was reaching up to the glass, banging on it with tears running down my face, begging for a chance at my life. That was the difference, and that's what we're looking for. Is there a flame in that belly? Do you have a soul? Are you ready to commit to the hardest thing you've ever done? Can you accept who you were? Because if you can't, you'll never become somebody else. So that's kind of the process that we take them through. It is not easy, and it's not a science, it's more of an art. And having done thousands of interviews and having been interviewed myself, my staff are all Delancey Street graduates except for one. We've done a lot of interviews, and every time we interview somebody, guess who we're talking to? Ourselves.
Mercy. All right. You can clap, that's fine. So I asked that because it's counterintuitive, what you're doing and what you're asking of people. I mean, on one hand, I think our sense is that somebody at the point that you're talking about should have completely given up. But what you're looking for is the opposite. Like they've found the will to fight for what it is they know they want. Like they've discovered something beyond the drugs, the crime, whatever, that is more important to them, that they're willing to strive for, right? And that's what's impressed me so much. And I've got to say, just full disclosure, I'm part of a founding board for a group that is trying to bring the Other Side Academy to Atlanta and start the model here. Barbara Ardell, seated right up here in front, is actually leading that effort and doing a marvelous job, I might add, of getting traction in short order to get this program here in Atlanta. So if you want to learn more, you can talk to Dave or Barb up here in front. So with that plug. Let me ask you this, Lloyd. With the work that you're doing, the question I can imagine that a lot of our employers in the audience are probably asking, what about liability issues and the legal aspects of having folks on your team that come from, a less than perfect background? How do you handle that?
How do we handle the legal aspects and the liabilities that go along? Well, first and foremost, we don't look at them as liabilities or legal issues, right? We look at them as, we have a saying that comes straight down from our owner. We value and love our number one asset, and our number one asset's our people, 2,600 of them. To the point that next week we'll give all 2,600 of them a Christmas bonus of 2 weeks or more, by the way. That's how much we value our number one assets. And so we don't look at them as a liability. We don't look at them as a legality issue or anything like that. And we don't even, quite honestly, we don't really care about it. They are a person who is alive and needs to have a career, who needs to have their life back, their self-esteem that you talked about earlier, their dignity. You want to talked about entry, right? Going into the program. When you're coming out of that program, can you imagine how they still feel? Right? Because I've met with a lot of them. I've met with many of our employees, and when they're re-entry, not reintegration, but re-entry. Reintegration, that's totally different still. And it's a lot of work that goes into that. So we call it a second chance program, quite honestly. It's probably a third or fourth or fifth or sixth or 10, 12, whatever it may be, right? Mainly because we don't look at them as liabilities, okay? There isn't any legal issues there. Now, have we had an issue or anything like that? One. I can think of one out of the hundreds of people that we've worked with where they became violent on the floor. But you know something? They didn't have to be a second chance person and become violent on the floor. I've got a lot of employees that might start a fight or something like that, and guess what? They're out the door. We don't tolerate that. It's not an attitude, it's not a culture we tolerate. But if they want to be redeemed, they want to give some forgiveness and everything else, guess what? A year later, we might just hire them back. Nah, we might not. We will just hire them back, right? We will, and we do. We give them a second chance. So we don't, it's just not a liability to us. It's about their career.
That's perfect. Shameless plug for something that we produce. We've got a fact sheet for employers if you're interested in knowing like what kind of tax credits or bonding programs or protections within the law that actually will help if that is a concern for you. We have copies of that in the back. It'll be on our website as well after the event. But I think Lloyd is absolutely right. The experience that we see in talking to groups that employers who bring on folks who maybe come from the criminal justice system or homelessness, they are much more of an asset than they are a liability. They're some of the most productive workers, most committed workers that you can have. And I think changing that attitude and that perception is the key to making a difference in this. So thank you for that. All right, Stacey, the thing I want to know from you is, where is it that you see the women that you're helping? What jobs, what areas of employment are offering the most opportunities? And, a corollary is sort of, where are you seeing places where you just maybe can't get a foothold and need some help?
So if I can start on the left with what my friend was saying here, is when we look at them as a liability and we don't look at them as ourselves, then we make a difference, and it's usually fear that's in the way, that's the blocking, because we feel that somebody's going to do something or my name is going to be blemished. So it really takes the ability to know that every one of us could be in that position. Every one of us experience life. Every one of us, if you haven't had a barrier, you haven't lived long enough, just wait. And so what we need from corporations and the jobs that we look for, they're entry level. And we look for a job that helps them sustain their life. I think in the panel before us, it's not a job in a fast food where they're not making enough, they can't pay rent, they can't pay child care, they can't pay transportation to work because they're still going to struggle. So it's my team and my responsibility to find a job where they can start entry level but move up quickly. So we work with the hospitality industry here in Atlanta, Georgia Hotels and Lodging Association to start there. We work with the restaurant associations to get them in positions, and we've identified training for management positions that they can move up into warehousing, something like what you're doing, your company. But we look for them all because then we also deal with the other half of our women, veterans who've gone through PTSD or military sex trauma or have some other issue, but they are highly skilled. And so, or the educated woman who needs a place to stay, and that's where our collaboration with Chick-fil-A and AIG and Kimberly-Clark and other corporations out here are partnering with us to help us. And when they come in and they adopt a class and they work with us on interviewing, they see the skills of the women. They see that these women are Walters. They might be Wandas, but they are probably going to be one of your most loyal employees because they've been giving that chance. And you know what? We're all human. We want to prove that we're worthy. And once we accept that in ourselves, we want you and others to acknowledge that. And they're going to be your hardest workers. When we graduate them, we see that in them. We give them roles in there to exhibit their leadership, to find their creativity, and they exhibit, and once they get a hold of it, there's no stopping them. I have cried more in this job than I have probably just watching them blossom, find themselves, and want to go after it, and want to show that they're worthy. And then when someone on the other side gives them a chance, they are probably one of the most loyal employees. You're going to get a Walter and a Wanda.
All right. Thank you very much. So, Phil, I want to turn to you. I want to hear, if you can, let me know some success stories that you would point to of folks who've been through your program and are now succeeding. And, a broader question is, how are you measuring success? What does that look like?
Okay, thank you, absolutely. One thing I want to point out, while men are there and they're working and going through our program, we're working, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with them in every aspect of their lives. We started with about 4 employers. We now have contractors, about 77 employers now. And one of the things that the employers mentioned to me, and because I asked why they decided to work with Georgia Works and ask about our employees or the men there that are clients. And one of the things that one of the employers mentioned to me, he said, your guys show up on time and they're ready to work. and made me really think that we were on the right path and doing the right thing. To answer the question about some of our greatest successes, there are almost 600 of them, and I mean, I could pick any story, but one in particular, and this gentleman's actually on my staff now. His name is Adolphus, and when he came to me, his story started like this. He started getting in trouble when he was 8 years old, living on the streets. This is the gentleman I mentioned that had been to prison over 100 times. He came to our program. He was a third guy in our program, and I actually did his interview because what we used to do was have guys leave and come back. I wanted to see if they really wanted this and how bad they wanted it. He was the first person there for his interview, for his final interview that day, and as he shared with me his story, at the time he was 58 years old, so he had been on the streets and in and out of prison for 50 years. He came in and he worked very hard. And one of the things that I knew is that he would not have an opportunity for being on the streets for 50 years to really get a good job, but he had the desire and the drive, and he wanted to be able to tell his story to other younger people so that they wouldn't make the same mistake. And I eventually hired him. He just impressed me so much. And he's been with us now 4 years, and he actually carries the culture of the program because he came through it and he got his life clean. One thing that was very funny, and which is why I'm sharing this story, was after 50 years, he had a job and he had to file income taxes. When he filed his income taxes, they would not send him his tax refund. They made him come to the IRS because they did not believe that he was alive. He went to the IRS and pick up his income tax check, and the guy told him, he's like, man, this is incredible. He had, I think, maybe filed 1 or 2 tax returns this whole time. And he told him, whatever you're doing, continue to do it. And he now helps carry the culture and share the Georgia Work story with men that are coming in, share his own life story. He's been clean now 5 years, doing a great job. And there are, tons and tons of stories like that. I run into men on the street that have left our program. Lots of them probably couldn't stand me when I was there. I'm like a drill sergeant. But they tell me thank you because they now have their life back. Their families, I see them out with their wives and their kids. And it's just incredible to see that. So again, here, measuring success on the books is a job in an apartment, but really measuring success in the community is seeing fathers with their kids and their wives. And my hope is this, and I've shared this before, that as we continue to restore and redeem men that have come from communities that are poor and that may be on the margins of society, that rather than the gang or the drug dealer being the leader in that community, the men that we're planting back out in the community, that we're helping restore lives, we're hoping that those guys now will be the community leaders. And we're starting to see that happen. So that's my success story.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, look, I've had a chance to meet Adolphus, and he is one incredible guy. He must be, 62?
63 now, yeah.
He has more energy than somebody a quarter his age, and he's a real ambassador for your work. Always has a smile, but man, he is on a mission to get the work done and to be a leader among the men that are in your program. It's incredible to see, and to think that 58 years of that man's life was lost. And you got it back.
Yes.
Great work. Dave, one of the things I want to sort of let others know about is the structure of the Other Side Academy. The work you're doing, you're dealing with a group of men and women in many cases they're just a tough group, right? And your whole program is structured with explicit acknowledgement of the deficits that these folks face. And you have really tangible ways to make sure that they're, being held accountable. And, I've got my own story of being held accountable while at the Other Side Academy by one of the students.
I'll ask you next.
Yeah. Maybe I'll tell that, or maybe I won't. I don't know. But please tell the audience about that, because I think it just speaks to the reality of what you're dealing with and how effective you are.
Although all of our students are former drug addicts, we don't even talk about drugs. If you talk about drugs at the Other Side Academy, it's an actionable offense. Because in reality, I can't say it any other way than this, drug addicts, we all have something in common. We become liars, cheats, thieves, manipulators, self-centered, self-seeking. We get on this hedonic treadmill and we can't get off. It's like hedonistic adaptation. We just start to acquire and learn those behaviors. Take the drugs away, guess what remains? Those behaviors. So when they come to us, we understand who they are. But if we focus on drugs as the issue, they're going back to use again. We focus specifically on the behaviors. And if you can take this population and give them a sanctuary, someplace safe to live for a minimum of 2 years, oftentimes much longer. As I said, I was in Delancey Street 8.5 years because I'm a slow learner. You give them the opportunity to learn to tell the truth, to learn to be accountable, and to learn to have integrity. Because ladies and gentlemen, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. And if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter. So when you take this population, drugs were really ancillary to the real issues. The issues were the behaviors. So now we live in a house of 90 plus people like us, where we have 200% accountability. It is core and fundamental to our principles. If he does something wrong and I know about it and he gets in trouble for it and I don't say something and they find out, I'm in more trouble than he is. So I quickly realize that I'm no longer going to allow his behaviors to affect my stay. After all, I've got time over my head. I get in too much trouble, get kicked out, or I split, I'm going back to prison. It is critical that our students learn to have boundaries, very firm boundaries, and to be accountable for themselves and to be accountable for others. We have what we call them games on Tuesday nights and Friday nights. There's nothing fun about them. It's not like Monopoly and checkers and, spades and things like that. It's an encounter group. You could be in a room of 20 people over here. There's another room of 20 people. There's another room of 20 people. And let's say, for example, I did something wrong in the house. Men and women aren't allowed to talk to each other. And I passed a woman a note that said, I really like you. I think you're attractive. I really, really like you. I can't wait till I can talk to you. She writes me back and we get caught. When we go to games on Tuesday night or Friday night, do you suppose we'll talk about the letter? Absolutely not. I had to go to my room and sneak to write the letter. When I got done, since I don't work with her, I had to give it to my buddy that I've known for years on the streets and in jails and prisons and coerce him to give it to her. So I don't even care about him. The woman I had the note go to has 10 years suspended over her head. In the letter, it said I liked her and I care about you. If I cared about her, I'd leave her alone. I didn't care about her. I didn't care about him. I don't really care about myself, but I was doing it all because it's what I wanted to make me feel good, the cheap feel good. So when we go to games on Tuesday nights and Friday nights, wow, I am in trouble. And I am going to hear about myself in a way that most people probably never will hear about themselves. And that's on Tuesday night. Then Friday night, I go to a games with 20 different people. I'm going to hear about it again. Then the next Tuesday, 20 more people that weren't in the first two games, until the whole house has gotten a piece of my Southern exposure. And pretty soon, you lay your head down at night in bed, and you go, my God, they're right. I am selfish. I am self-seeking. I don't care about anybody but what I want when I want it. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason why our population gets in trouble and the reason why they go to jail and the reason why they go to prison isn't because they do drugs. It's because they do what they want rather than what they need to do. We get in trouble for doing what we want. So we give them the opportunity and the peer interaction. And there's no counselors or doctors there trying to fix them. It's all peer ran, very intentional. And there's consequences to your actions. But unlike other organizations or on the streets, when they do something wrong, they go to prison, you're not going to get a chance to fix anything there. Here you do something wrong, you're going to be held accountable by your peers. So there's a lot of social, I don't want to call it humiliation, but that's what ends up happening in a game is you feel humiliated for what you do, and then you change it. You get the opportunity to make the mistakes and fix them. But we even take it a step farther, because if I forget to set my alarm in the morning, that's a mistake. If I accidentally run that red light because I was having a conversation, that's a mistake. But when I wrote that letter, I made the conscious decision to do the wrong thing. That is not a mistake. When you think things through and you're calculating and you make the conscious decision to do it and you do it anyway, that's not a mistake. We do not make excuses for our students. We hold them accountable to their decisions. And if you stay through the process 2, 3, 4 years or 8, and you learn to make good decisions every day, you just solved the drug problem and you never even addressed it.
Awesome. So we're running low on time, so maybe a couple more questions. I know we've got some questions from the audience. One of those is, how do you deal with individuals who might be experiencing mental health issues? Do your programs take those folks? How do you assess it, and what do you do?
Well, actually, for our program, it's not necessarily designed for folks with mental health, but not everybody with a mental health diagnosis is going to get disability. So a lot of those folks can work. So we work very closely with the Grady Hospital System, with Mercy Care, to make sure that men have access to therapy, medication if they need it. We have a therapist and counselor on staff to be able to help those men get through. And we've had lots of good success with folks as long as it's addressed and they continue their therapy. We've had lots of good success with folks with mental health.
Okay. Great. Anybody else?
There's 3 hard stops at the Other Side Academy. We don't take folks who are suffering from mental health issues that require psychotropic medication. Now, keep in mind, many of our students, while they're in jail, I could go back to jail tomorrow and be on 4 medications that same night and just tell the doctor everything I need to tell him in order to get on medication. So a lot of the people that come to us have been on medication for anxiety or depression or things of that nature. And it's amazing when I talk to them in the interview and I ask them, are you taking any psychotropic medications? I take something for anxiety or I take something for depression. Well, do you need it? No. Well, why are you taking it? Because I'm in jail and I'm a drug addict and I need something to help me sleep. So what was your diagnosis? Anxiety and depression. Do you have anxiety and depression? No. So we lied to the doctor. But I can't take him if he's on the medication, so guess what he does? He goes back to the doctor and tells the doctor, I don't need it anymore, and guess who signs him off? The same one who 2 weeks ago put him on. So if you have a true diagnosis and you do require medication, then we can't take you. But otherwise, a lot of our students have been on them at different times.
Great.
So there's a range for what we call mental illness, and so I'm kind of your collaborative partner for the female side, right? So we do the same thing. We partner with people and get them counseling and therapeutic when we identify it, but we don't always identify it when people come in. Everybody's treated the same, and then we realize that we can't put certain people in front of certain jobs or interviews, or they're not coming through the program at the end as desired and what we wanted to put them in front of a specific employer, but then we go and get them help in another way. So there's help for everybody in different directions that we go, and so that also skews some of our employment measures. When we look at our key performance indicators, our KPIs and what we're doing, we have to scale some of our numbers down when we don't hit 100% employment, because not everybody from the homeless shelters are employable.
That's great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this is just maybe a little unexpected, so hopefully it won't throw too big of a wrench into things, but you have a room full of influential people, some policymakers in the room. I'd be interested in your feedback as to what sort of barriers you see, legal or otherwise, that prevents your programs from being as effective as you want them to be, to expanding, anything in that realm. While we have, people's attention that you'd like to share, would love to know about it.
So I think that with reintegration, there's what I'll call 2 primary obstacles. One we call tactical obstacles, and one's that social and emotional obstacle. The tactical ones are easy. They're not easy, but they can be overcome, and I think legislation and everything else could help in this regard. But, getting them the identity they need, getting them bank accounts, getting banks that work with them, getting the transportation systems in our cities to work with us, which, quite honestly, MARTA has done a great job at doing for us. They actually put the buses at our facilities or really close to our facilities here in Atlanta. They've done a great job of working with us. But like in Kansas City, it was very difficult there because we couldn't get the bus system to work with us, and I ended up having to go to Uber, who worked with us for a couple weeks until I could get the bus systems going and so forth. So transportation is always a big thing. So those are the tactical things about reintegration. But most important too, and the one I think I find the hardest is what I call the relational and the social. It's the support group. So we work with a company in Dallas called Synacor, very similar to your organization, 18, 24 months. And they do get to come out and go to work typically after a year. So they've got another 6 months or another year before they graduate and so forth. And we've overcome a lot of those obstacles. But one of the things that I noticed early on that they had, and you just spoke about, and Phil spoke about in his program, is they have support systems. They have support systems, and so many programs don't have a support system. They don't have that ability for the second chance employee to go back and be able to ask questions or discuss their issues or talk about the things that they need. And if they don't have that, what do? They fall back. They go back to what they are comfortable with, right? Because they're growing. As I tell leaders and managers in our company, if you want to go to the next level, a manager or leader in our company, you have to realize one thing: it's the leadership pipeline. That when you get there, you're going to be uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not being successful. But if you are uncomfortable and you don't know how to handle a situation or manage something, the best thing you can do is learn how to manage it from the next level. Because if you don't, you're going to go back to what you felt made you successful, which means you're going back. And you don't want to go back on that leadership pipeline. And it's the same thing with second chance employees, okay? They'll want to go back to what they felt made them successful, the ego that we talked about earlier, right? And the reason I'm bringing that up, because in relation to your question is that the programs out there that we need are programs that are going to help them. To your point, they may not have a mom or a dad or a family to go to, right? But who is that they can establish new friends with? The right friends, right? The right relationships, the right social support, the people they can lean on if they need to lean on somebody. What organizations and what type of legislation and government support to those organizations that can help the second chance people, if that makes sense to everybody.
Real quickly, one of the things that we do with men once they come in our program is we teach them to stop running from things and to address it. So we stop running, we lay everything on the table. And as she mentioned earlier, most of our men are getting entry-level jobs. We have been fortunate that the hourly wage for our men has continued to grow. So we're up $12.50, $13 an hour for a lot of our men. But a lot of them come in with child support issues. Our case managers work very hard with them a lot of times to try to get modifications and things for the men. And at that point, that man has made the decision that I'm not going to run from this anymore. We tell them you owe it to the taxpayers, but you also owe it to your children to take care of them. But we've still found it sometimes difficult for men, especially if they have large arrears, to get the modifications. Without that, they aren't going to ever be able to address it. This person's finally getting his life back on track, he's getting stable, he's getting an entry-level job to be able to support himself and take care of himself, and that's hanging over his head. And if it's not addressed to the point, then that man gives up again, and he's back out on the street. And, you know, something around that area, again here, not saying that it should be wiped away, because if you owe it, you owe it. Let's find a way to make him be able to address it and pay it and still be able to take care of himself and take care of his kids.
Excellent. Stacy?
I think there's a responsibility for all of us. And one of the things that I've been able to do is grow up in corporate America, but now have the chance on the other side of the bell curve to give back. And we're all sitting in a seat where we can give back. And our policymakers, what we're really talking about is eradicating poverty. and eradicating poverty for the children. And there are children who don't eat on the weekends when they leave school. And so we need to all know that when we go back to our comfortable homes and all of that. And so policymakers, having sat in that seat before, that's a ministry. And it's a ministry to be a voice for those who don't have a voice. And that's how I had to look at it, and that's how I was able to sleep at night and make decisions and vote on certain things as an elected official. And so the difference is, at the policy level, there's affordable housing is an issue. Affordable housing in communities where I can get to work. Transportation in Atlanta is an issue. I can't live and work in the same place. I don't have a car. MARTA doesn't go to certain places where there's jobs. So while we're saying that there's all these jobs, but where are they located? Can I get there? Childcare in 1980s, when I was in college and on Capitol Hill as an intern, I wrote a paper on how corporations need to have childcare on site so mothers can go to work. We're still struggling with that. We're still struggling. So if I get them a job at a fast food restaurant because they're in a reentry program, they can't afford childcare. They can't afford food and shelter and transportation. So these are real issues, and this is where we need to know, whether whatever side of politics we sit on, that we've got to come to the table together as a bipartisan. We've got to embrace the nonprofits along with the policymakers, and we've got to become Silicon Valley. And that's what this is today. This is Silicon Valley. This is how do we do it? This is what do we need to create? There's funding that's needed for stipends, so while they're going through our programs, there's some kind of stipend that they can have. Because the barrier that I have is that women say, I need to go to work now. So they can't take the 5-week curriculum, and then they're still dealing with their issues and they're still out there. But if we can find a way for funding, a stipend to get them through programs where they can retain a job, we're gonna see our poverty levels decrease. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about just today. We're talking about the future of those children, of the mothers and the families and the fathers who can take care of the children, and helping them with a support network. One of the things that we have done is I try to take the things that I have had and incorporate. We've started a sorority. And so we've started a sorority of these network of women, reach one, teach one. And so they have their colors, they have an emblem, they have a network of support within each other.
Thank you guys for your recommendations and just for a wonderful panel. Will you guys help me thank these folks?